Commander Zethkar of the Vorthak Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the small human vessel drift helplessly in space. The ship was barely the size of a shuttle compared to his massive dreadnought, its hull scarred and blackened from what appeared to be a recent battle. Emergency lights flickered weakly through its tiny viewports, and no energy signatures indicated active weapons or shields. Pathetic. Zethkar clicked his mandibles in amusement. The insectoid commander's forearms gestured dismissively at the tactical display. One, human. Alone in a damaged craft, these mammals truly are as weak as our intelligence reports suggested. His second in command, Sub-Commander Vexistal, approached with measured steps, his own chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the bridge lights. "Sir, our scans indicate the human vessel contains valuable cargo, refined quantum crystals, military-grade equipment, and what appears to be classified data cores." Zethkar's compound eyes focused on the readouts. The Vorthak had been raiding human supply lines for months, testing their defenses before the main invasion fleet arrived. So far, the humans had proven disappointingly easy prey. Their ships were slow, their weapons primitive, and their soldiers lacked the killer instinct that had made the Vorthak the terror of 3 star systems. "Hail the human vessel," Zethkar ordered. "Let's see what this lone mammal has to say before we take his cargo and leave him floating in the void." The communication officer's clawed fingers danced across the control surfaces. After a moment, a holographic image materialized above the central console. A human male appeared, appearing to be in his early 30s by their species' aging patterns. He had short dark hair, calm gray eyes, and wore what looked like a simple pilot's uniform. Most notably, he seemed completely unafraid despite facing a warship that could reduce his tiny craft to atoms. "This is Captain Marcus Reed of the merchant vessel Wayfarer," the human said, his voice steady and clear. "I'm broadcasting on open channels. To whom am I speaking?" Zethkar stepped forward, his intimidating form filling the communication pickup. At nearly 3 meters tall, with razor-sharp limbs and a face that was pure nightmare fuel to most species, he was accustomed to seeing immediate terror in his victim's eyes. Instead, the human simply waited patiently for a response. "I am Commander Zethkar of the Vorthak Expeditionary Force," he announced, his voice a harsh rasp through the translator. "Your vessel has been seized under authority of the Vorthak Empire. Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in your immediate execution." Captain Reed nodded slowly, as if considering the offer. "I see. And if I cooperate? Then your death will be quick and merciful instead of prolonged and creative," Zethkar replied with what passed for humor among his species. To the commander's surprise, the human actually smiled. It wasn't the desperate, pleading expression he expected, but something else entirely, something that made Zethkar's predatory instincts suddenly feel uneasy. "Commander, I have a counterproposal," Reed said calmly. "You and your crew leave this system immediately, and I'll pretend this conversation never happened. You have 60 seconds to decide." The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of ship systems. Zethkar stared at the image of the human, certain he had misheard the translation. Sub-Commander Vexital's mandibles clicked nervously. Did this mammal just threaten us?" Zethkar asked, his voice rising in pitch with disbelief. "I believe he did, sir," Vextal confirmed, equally bewildered. Zethkar's laughter was like breaking glass. It echoed through the bridge as his crew joined in the mirth. The idea that a single human in a crippled ship could pose any threat to their mighty vessel was beyond absurd. "Human," Zethkar said when his laughter finally subsided, "I admire your courage, even if it stems from complete stupidity. My ship carries enough firepower to glass a continent, my crew numbers in the thousands. You are one mammal in a broken toy. What exactly do you think you can do to us?" Reed's smile never wavered. 47 seconds remaining, Commander." The casual confidence in the human's voice sent an unexpected chill down Zethkar's spine. He had encountered many species in his military career, and he knew the difference between bravado and genuine threat assessment. This human wasn't posturing or buying time. He genuinely believed he held the superior position. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, his voice uncertain. "I'm detecting some kind of energy buildup in the human vessel, but I can't identify the source. It's not matching any known weapon signatures in our database." Zethkar's amusement faded. "Elaborate." "The readings are strange, sir. It's as if the ship itself is becoming some kind of energy matrix. But that's impossible. Their technology isn't advanced enough for—" The sensor officer's words were cut short as every alarm on the bridge began wailing simultaneously. Red warning lights bathed the command center in an ominous glow as damage reports flooded in from across the ship. "Report," Zethkar barked. "Unknown energy discharge from the human vessel." The tactical officer shouted over the chaos. "No visible projectile or beam, but we've lost shields on decks 7 through 15. Hull integrity is down to 60% in those sections." Zethkar stared at the tactical display in shock. The damage indicators showed massive structural failure across a huge section of his ship, as if something had simply deleted portions of the hull at a molecular level, but their sensors hadn't detected any weapon fire. 20 seconds. Reed's voice cut through the alarm klaxons. Still maddeningly calm. "Impossible," Zethkar whispered. Then, louder. "All batteries. Target the human vessel. Destroy it immediately." The weapons officer's claws flew across his controls, firing all forward guns. A dozen particle beam weapons lanced out from the Vorthak dreadnought, each one capable of vaporizing a city block. They struck the tiny human ship and simply vanished. The beams seemed to be absorbed by some kind of field surrounding the craft, which still showed no active shield generators on their scans. 10 seconds, Reed announced. Panic was beginning to set in among the bridge crew. Zethkar could see it in their rapid movements, hear it in their increasingly frantic reports. Whatever was happening defied everything they knew about human technology and capabilities. "Sir, recommend immediate withdrawal," Vextal said urgently. "This is beyond our current tactical parameters." "No," Zethkar snarled. "I will not retreat from a single human. Launch fighters. Board that ship. I want that mammal brought to me alive so I can dissect him myself." 5 seconds, Reed said. And for the first time, his expression hardened. "I gave you a choice, Commander." The human vessel suddenly blazed with energy signatures that should have been impossible for a ship of its size. The space around it seemed to ripple and distort, as if reality itself was bending. "Time's up," Reed said simply. What happened next would be debated by Vorthak military analysts for generations, assuming any survived to debate it. The human ship didn't fire weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, space-time around the Vorthak dreadnought began to fold and twist. Sections of the massive warship simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, but somehow edited out of reality. The proud vessel that had terrorized a dozen worlds began to collapse in on itself, as fundamental forces were manipulated by technology the Vorthak couldn't even comprehend. Emergency pods began launching from the dying ship as sections of hull peeled away like flower petals. Zethkar watched in horror as his mighty flagship was systematically dismantled by forces beyond his understanding. "All hands abandon ship," he finally managed to scream. "Repeat, all hands abandon ship." As his command crew scrambled for the escape pods, Zethkar stared at the tactical display showing his ship's death throes. Somehow, impossibly, a lone human in a damaged merchant vessel had just destroyed a Vorthak dreadnought without firing a single conventional weapon. The last thing he saw before reaching his escape pod was Captain Reed's calm face on the communication screen, watching the destruction with the same mild interest someone might show while observing an interesting insect. "Next time," Reed said quietly. "I won't be so generous with the warning." The transmission cut out just as Zethkar sealed himself into his escape pod. As the pod jettisoned from his dying flagship, he caught a final glimpse of the human vessel. It no longer appeared damaged. In fact, it seemed to be growing, its hull extending and reshaping itself into something sleek and predatory. The escape pod's emergency beacon activated automatically, broadcasting a distress signal that would bring rescue ships within hours. As Zethkar drifted through space, watching his once mighty dreadnought complete its impossible collapse, one thought echoed through his mind. What had the Vorthak intelligence services gotten so catastrophically wrong about humanity? Hours later, when the rescue ships arrived to collect the survivors, they found only empty escape pods, floating in space. No wreckage from the dreadnought remained, just scattered debris that looked more like metal shavings than the remnants of a starship. The human vessel was long gone, having vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. The few crew members who had survived with their sanity intact all told the same impossible story. A lone human had somehow destroyed their ship using technology that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics. Their reports were initially dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations until similar incidents began occurring across the sector. Within days, 3 more Vorthak vessels had encountered solitary human ships and suffered the same fate. Each time, the human captain offered the same ultimatum: leave immediately or face consequences. Each time, the Vorthak commanders made the same fatal mistake of underestimating their opponent. Word began to spread through the Vorthak fleet of a phantom ship crewed by a single human who could destroy their most powerful vessels with ease. Some called it propaganda, designed to hurt Rail. Others whispered that the humans had been hiding their true capabilities all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal their hand. But deep in the classified archives of Vorthak military intelligence, analysts were beginning to piece together a terrifying possibility. The humans they had been attacking weren't really humans at all, at least, not entirely. They were something else. Something that had been masquerading as a primitive species, while studying their enemies and preparing for war. Sub-Commander Vexettel, one of the few senior officers to survive the first encounter, submitted a report that would eventually reach the highest levels of the Vorthak Empire. Recommend immediate cessation of all hostile actions against human targets. Evidence suggests we have severely miscalculated their technological capabilities and military strength. The entity calling itself Captain Reed demonstrated technology far beyond our current understanding of physics. Suspect the human designation may be a deliberate misdirection designed to conceal the true nature of this species. The report concluded with a recommendation that chilled every Vorthak commander who read it. Suggest immediate defensive posture and preparation for full-scale conflict with an unknown enemy of unprecedented capability. The humans are not what they appear to be, but by then, it was already too late. Captain Marcus Reed was no longer alone in space, and his small merchant vessel was no longer disguised as damaged cargo hauler. Across the galaxy, other ships were receiving new orders, and their human crews were finally authorized to drop their carefully maintained pretense of weakness. The hunting season was about to begin. Admiral Crixmoth of the Vorthak Third Fleet received the encrypted transmission while reviewing routine patrol reports in his flagship's war room. The massive Vorthak leader, whose chitinous hide bore the ritual scars of a dozen victorious campaigns, read the message 3 times before allowing himself to believe its contents. 4 dreadnoughts destroyed, 12 heavy cruisers missing and presumed lost, all by individual human vessels, encountered during what should have been simple raids on merchant convoys. The loss reports painted an impossible picture of humans wielding technology that could dismantle Vorthak warships as easily as a child might destroy a toy. Communications, Crixmoth rumbled, his voice carrying across the strategium where dozens of junior officers coordinated fleet movements. Send coded transmission to Fleet Command. Request immediate consultation with the Intelligence Division's xenobiology specialists. The communications officer, a young Vorthak whose carapace still held the blue-green hue of recent molting, hesitated. Sir, Fleet Command has ordered radio silence during the current operation phase. Crixmoth's primary arm slammed down on the tactical table, causing several holographic displays to flicker. I don't care what protocols say. We need answers about these humans before we lose another ship. The war room fell silent except for the low thrum of the flagship's engines. Every officer present had read the same reports, seen the same impossible damage assessments. The humans had gone from being considered easy prey to existential threat in the span of a single week. Sir, the fleet intelligence officer spoke up, approaching with careful steps. We've been analyzing all available data on human encounters. The patterns are disturbing. Crixmoth gestured for the officer to continue. Intelligence Officer Zektar activated a holographic display showing a star chart of the sector, with red markers indicating locations of destroyed Vorthak vessels. Every engagement follows the same sequence. Zektar explained. Vorthok forces encounter what appears to be a lone, damaged human vessel. The human captain offers our forces a chance to withdraw. When refused, the human ship demonstrates capabilities far beyond anything in our technological database. Show me the sensor recordings from Zethkar's encounter, Krixmoth ordered. The holographic display shifted to show the tactical readouts from the destroyed dreadnought's final moments. Even knowing what was coming, watching the impossible sequence of events made the Admiral's mandibles click nervously. The human vessel had manipulated space-time itself, treating the fundamental forces of the universe like tools in a workshop. Analysis suggests the humans possess technology based on principles we don't understand, Zektar continued. Quantum manipulation at a macro scale, localized gravity wells, possibly even controlled singularity generation. It's as if they've weaponized the basic building blocks of reality. A junior communications officer suddenly straightened at his station. Admiral. Incoming transmission from the patrol frigate Scar Wing. They report contact with an unknown vessel in Grid 77 Alpha. Krixmoth felt his combat instincts sharpen. Unknown vessel? Specify. Sir, Captain Veltar reports it appears to be a human craft. But different from previous encounters. It's much larger, and it's broadcasting on all frequencies. The Admiral's compound eyes focused intently on the communications station. What's the message? It's requesting parley, sir. With the highest-ranking Vorthak commander in this system, the transmission specifically asks for Admiral Krixmoth by name. A chill ran through the war room. The humans knew not only that the Third Fleet was in the system, but who commanded it. That implied intelligence-gathering capabilities the Vorthak hadn't suspected. Patch me through, Krixmoth ordered after a moment's consideration. The main display flickered, then resolved into the image of a human female. She appeared to be middle-aged by their species' standards, with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore what looked like a formal military uniform. Though not of any design in the Vorthak databases, Admiral Krixmoth, she said, inclining her head slightly in what might have been a gesture of respect. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, of the Terran Defense Coordination. Thank you for accepting my transmission. Terran Defense Coordination? Krixmoth repeated, his translator struggling with the unfamiliar terms. Our intelligence indicates no such organization exists among human governments. Well, Admiral Chen smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Your intelligence has been operating under several significant misconceptions. Admiral, may I suggest a face-to-face meeting? I believe we have much to discuss. You want to meet in person? Krixmoth's surprise was evident in his voice. Do you understand the tactical situation? You are one ship facing an entire fleet. Actually, Admiral, I think you'll find the tactical situation is somewhat different than you suppose. Chen gestured to someone off-screen. Perhaps this will help clarify matters. The display split, showing both Admiral Chen and a tactical overview of the local system. What Krixmoth saw made his blood run cold. The sensors showed not one human vessel, but dozens. Ships that hadn't been there moments before now surrounded the Vorthok fleet in a perfect sphere of containment. Impossible, Krixmoth whispered. Your sensors showed exactly what we wanted them to show, Chen replied calmly. We've been observing your fleet since you entered this system, Admiral. Every ship, every weapon, every communication. We know your strength, your capabilities, and your intentions. The flagship's tactical officer was frantically working at his station. Sir. Confirming multiple contacts. Reading 43 distinct vessels. All of unknown design. They're not showing up on conventional sensors, but gravitational distortion indicates massive ships, some larger than our dreadnoughts. Krixmoth stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His fleet of 37 vessels was completely surrounded by an enemy force that had appeared from nothing. The humans had achieved total tactical surprise against one of the most experienced military commanders in the Vorthak Empire. What are you? He asked finally. We're human, Admiral. Just not the kind your species has been encountering until now. Chen's expression remained neutral. but her voice carried undertones of steel. The vessels your forces have been destroying belong to our Research and Reconnaissance Division. They were gathering intelligence on your military capabilities while maintaining the fiction that we were a primitive, divided species. Research and reconnaissance? Crixmoth felt his understanding of the tactical situation shifting like quicksand. You mean the ships we destroyed were not merchants and civilians? Military scouts, Admiral. Volunteers who maintained their cover even unto death to ensure you never suspected what you were truly facing. For the first time, anger flickered in Chen's eyes. Captain Reed, and others like him, have been documenting your war crimes. Your casual destruction of what you believe to be civilian vessels. Every murder, every act of cruelty, every moment of your species' arrogance has been recorded and analyzed. The war room was deadly quiet now. Every Vorthak officer understood they were no longer hunters but prey. The humans had been studying them like laboratory specimens, gathering data, while their own people died to maintain the deception. What do you want? Crixmoth asked. Surrender, Chen replied without hesitation. Immediate and unconditional. Your fleet will power down all weapons and shields and prepare to be boarded. Your crews will be processed as prisoners of war according to the Galactic Convention on Armed Conflict. Crixmoth's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. You speak of galactic conventions to a species that recognizes no authority but strength. We have never surrendered to any enemy. Then you'll be the first, Chen said matter-of-factly. Admiral, your species has spent decades building a reputation as unstoppable conquerors. You've terrorized civilizations across 3 star systems, believing that your superior technology and ruthless tactics made you invincible. You were wrong. The tactical display updated, showing energy readings from the human vessels that made Crixmoth's flagship look like a child's toy. Whatever power sources drove those ships operated on principles that made his own fusion reactors seem primitive. You have 2 minutes to make your decision. Chen continued. Surrender and live as prisoners. Or resist and join your previous commanders in whatever afterlife your species believes in. And if we choose a third option? Crixmoth asked, his hand moving toward the fleet-wide communications control. If we scatter, run for jump range, warn the Empire of what we've discovered? Chen's smile was now purely predatory. Admiral, do you really think we haven't considered that possibility? As if on cue, the tactical display showed new contacts appearing throughout the system. More human vessels. Positioned at every possible jump point and escape route, the Third Fleet wasn't just surrounded. It was trapped in a perfectly orchestrated net. How long? Crixmoth asked quietly. How long have you been planning this? Since the first Vorthak vessel crossed into human space and opened fire on a colony transport, Chen replied. We've been preparing for this war for 15 years, Admiral. Every raid, every attack, every casual act of violence committed by your species has been accounted for in our planning. The communications officer looked up from his station. Admiral, receiving surrender requests from several of our ships. The frigate commanders are requesting permission to stand down. Crixmoth closed his eyes, feeling the weight of centuries of Vorthak military tradition pressing down on him. No Vorthak fleet had ever surrendered in the Empire's history. But no Vorthak fleet had ever faced an enemy like this. Admiral Chen, he said finally, if we surrender, what assurances do we have regarding treatment of our personnel? You'll be treated according to established protocols for prisoners of war. Medical care, adequate nutrition, accommodation suitable for your physiology. Your crews will not be harmed as long as they comply with reasonable orders. And if we resist? Chen's expression didn't change. Then you'll discover what our weapons can do when we're not holding back. The ships your forces encountered before were using minimum necessary force to maintain their covers. We won't show such restraint with an enemy fleet that chooses to fight. Crixmoth looked around his war room at officers who had served with him through a dozen campaigns. Young Vorthak, who believed in the superiority of their species. Veteran commanders who had never known defeat. All of them were looking to him for guidance, in a situation none of them had ever imagined facing. Time, Admiral, Chen said quietly. The decision, when it came, felt like betraying everything his species stood for. But looking at the tactical display showing the overwhelming human force surrounding his fleet, Crixmoth realized that maintaining the honor of the Vorthak Empire meant ensuring some of its warriors survived to warn others. "Fleet Command, this is Admiral Crixmoth," he said into the communications pickup. "All vessels are to power down weapons and shields immediately. Prepare for boarding operations. We are surrendering to human forces." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the status displays began showing Vorthak vessels complying with the order. Weapons systems powered down, shield generators went offline, and proud warships that had struck fear into the hearts of entire civilizations prepared to be captured by an enemy they had never truly understood. "Thank you, Admiral," Chen said, and there was something that might have been respect in her voice. "Boarding parties will arrive within the hour. Please prepare a complete roster of all personnel and a detailed inventory of your ship's capabilities." "Admiral Chen," Crixmoth said before she could cut the transmission. "The Empire will send more fleets, larger forces. They won't make the same mistakes we did." Chen nodded slowly. "We're counting on it, Admiral. We're counting on it." The transmission ended, leaving Crixmoth alone with the reality of what had just occurred. The Third Fleet, pride of the Vorthak military, had been captured without firing a shot by an enemy that had been pretending to be defenseless prey. As human boarding craft began approaching his flagship, one final thought occurred to the defeated admiral. If this was how the humans treated what they considered a minor engagement, what were they preparing for the main Vorthak fleet? The answer would come sooner than he expected, and it would reshape the balance of power in their corner of the galaxy forever. Supreme Marshal Yithagoth stood before the enormous strategic display in the heart of the Vorthak Empire's military command center, his ancient carapace bearing the accumulated scars of 40 years of conquest. The holographic representation of the galaxy showed the Empire's vast territory marked in the traditional crimson of Vorthak dominance, but recent reports had introduced disturbing patches of uncertainty along the human border regions. "Explain to me again how we lost contact with the Third Fleet," the Supreme Marshal commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had crushed a dozen species beneath Vorthak rule. Fleet Intelligence Director Kolveth approached the display with visible reluctance. The younger Vorthak's movements betrayed nervousness unusual in someone who had risen to such a high position within the military hierarchy. "Sir, Admiral Crixmoth's fleet entered the Kepler 442 system on schedule and established patrol patterns according to operational parameters. Their last transmission indicated contact with human vessels. Then, nothing. Complete communications blackout. 47 ships," Yithagoth mused, his forearms gesturing at the tactical markers. "Admiral Crixmoth, 15 veteran commanders, and nearly 30,000 crew members. They don't simply vanish. Sir, we've dispatched 3 reconnaissance squadrons to investigate. None have returned." The Supreme Marshal's compound eyes focused on the intelligence director with predatory intensity. "Are you suggesting that humans are somehow responsible for the disappearance of our most experienced fleet commander and his entire force?" Kolveth's mandibles clicked nervously. "Sir, there have been irregularities in our intelligence assessments regarding human capabilities. The initial raids encountered unexpectedly sophisticated resistance." "Sophisticated resistance?" Yithagoth's laughter was like breaking glass. "From mammals who barely achieved interstellar flight 2 centuries ago?" "Director, I think your analysts may be suffering from battle fatigue." Before Kolveth could respond, an urgent chime echoed through the command center. The communications officer, a seasoned veteran whose scarred hide told stories of countless battles, straightened at his station. "Supreme Marshal, incoming transmission on priority channels. The source identifies itself as the Terran Defense Coordination, requesting immediate conference with the highest-ranking Vorthak military commander." "Terran Defense Coordination?" Yithagoth repeated, his voice tinged with confusion. "There is no such organization in our intelligence files." "Sir, the transmission is coming from the Kepler 442 system, the same location where we lost contact with the Third Fleet." The strategic implications hit Yithagoth like a physical blow. If humans were somehow involved in the Third Fleet's disappearance, this communication could provide crucial intelligence about their fate. "Route the transmission to the main display," he ordered. The holographic star map dissolved, replaced by the image of a human male who appeared to be in early middle age by their species' standards. He wore a crisp military uniform of unfamiliar design, and his calm gray eyes held an intelligence that made Yithagoth's predatory instincts stir uneasily. "Supreme Marshal Yithagoth," the human said, his pronunciation of the Vorthak name flawless, despite the linguistic complexity. "I am Admiral Marcus Reed of the Terran Defense Coordination. We need to discuss the current situation between our species." Yithagoth studied the human's face, noting details that his military experience had taught him to analyze. No fear, no deference, no recognition of the vast power imbalance that should exist between a single human and the Supreme Marshal of the Vorthak Empire. If anything, the human seemed to be evaluating him in return. "Admiral Reed," Yithagoth said carefully, "I am not familiar with your organization. Our intelligence indicates that humans maintain several competing governments with no unified military command." Reed's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes that might have been amusement. "Your intelligence is several years out of date, Supreme Marshal. The threat posed by Vorthak expansion convinced our various governments to establish unified defensive coordination. I have authority to speak for all human military forces." "Interesting," Yithagoth mused. "And what do you wish to discuss?" "The immediate cessation of Vorthak military operations in human space," Reed replied without hesitation. "Your forces have been committing acts of war against civilian populations for months. This must stop." The command center fell silent. Around the strategic display, dozens of Vorthak officers stared at the human in disbelief. A member of a species they considered barely evolved prey was issuing ultimatums to the Supreme Marshal of their empire. "Admiral Reed," Yithagoth said slowly, "do you understand the relative military capabilities of our species? The Vorthak Empire commands fleets numbering in the thousands of vessels. Our technology has conquered civilizations across 3 star systems. You represent a species that we could eliminate within months if we chose to commit our full strength." "Actually," Reed said calmly, "I think you'll find the relative capabilities are somewhat different than your assessments suggest. Perhaps I should clarify the current tactical situation." The display split, showing both Reed's image and what appeared to be a tactical overview. What Yithagoth saw made his ancient blood run cold. The readouts showed human fleet positions throughout Vorthak space, not just along the border regions but deep within their core systems. "Impossible," Yithagoth whispered. "Our sensor networks would have detected any major fleet movements." "Your sensor networks detected exactly what we wanted them to detect," Reed explained patiently. "Supreme Marshal, the Vorthak Empire has been under complete surveillance for the past 18 months. Every fleet movement, every strategic planning session, every communication has been monitored and analyzed." Fleet Intelligence Director Kolveth was frantically working at a nearby console, his claws flying across tactical assessment interfaces. "Sir, I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies throughout our space. If these readings are accurate, there are human vessels in orbit around our core worlds." "Not just vessels," Reed continued, his voice still maddeningly calm. "Complete battle fleets, Supreme Marshal. Each one capable of reducing your planetary installations to rubble within hours. We've been positioned and waiting for this conversation." Yithagoth felt reality shifting around him like quicksand. The tactical situation he thought he understood had been turned completely inside out. The humans weren't defending against Vorthak expansion. They had already achieved strategic dominance throughout the empire. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Immediate withdrawal of all Vorthak forces from human space," Reed replied. "Complete cessation of hostile activities against any human vessels or installations. Recognition of established borders and a formal non-aggression treaty." "And if we refuse?" Reed's expression finally showed emotion, but it wasn't fear or uncertainty. It was something far more dangerous. Confident determination. "Then we implement what our strategic planners call the Omega Protocol. Every Vorthak military installation, every fleet base, every strategic resource center throughout your empire experiences simultaneous targeted strikes. Your capacity for interstellar warfare would be eliminated within 72 hours. The communications officer looked up from his station, his voice barely controlled. "Supreme Marshal, we're receiving confirmation signals from our deepest monitoring stations. Human ships are indeed positioned throughout our space. The gravitational signatures are consistent with vessels' mass equivalent to our largest dreadnoughts. Yithagoth stared at the tactical display, trying to process the impossibility of what he was seeing. The humans had somehow achieved total strategic surprise against an empire that had dominated interstellar warfare for generations. How? He asked simply. The same way we've been gathering intelligence on your military capabilities, Supreme Marshal. The raids your forces conducted against what you believed were civilian vessels provided us with detailed analysis of your technology, tactics, and strategic thinking. Every attack was monitored, recorded, and used to refine our operational planning. You're saying your civilian ships were actually military vessels? Research and reconnaissance platforms, Reed corrected. Crewed by volunteers who maintained their cover even unto death to ensure you never suspected what you were truly facing. Captain Reed, Admiral Chen, and others like them, died to provide the intelligence we needed to achieve this tactical position. For the first time in his long military career, Supreme Marshal Yithagoth felt the cold touch of genuine fear. The humans hadn't simply developed unexpected military capabilities. They had orchestrated a complex deception that had fooled the entire Vorthak intelligence apparatus. The ships we destroyed, he said quietly. They could have defended themselves? 200 back. With continular well. 200 back to in hard for, easily. But revealing our true capabilities too early would have compromised the larger strategic objective. Every civilian vessel your forces destroyed was actually more powerful than your heaviest dreadnought. The implications crashed down on Yithagoth like an avalanche. The Vorthak Empire had been living in an illusion of military superiority, while their intended victims prepared for total war. Every raid, every act of aggression, had been allowed to succeed, while humans gathered the intelligence they needed to plan the Empire's destruction. Supreme Marshal, Reed continued, you have 1 hour to make your decision. Withdraw your forces and negotiate a formal ceasefire, or face the consequences of continuing this conflict. And Admiral Krixmoth's fleet? Captured intact, along with complete intelligence on your military capabilities. The Third Fleet has provided valuable insight into Vorthak's strategic thinking and technological limitations. The command center was completely silent now, except for the low hum of electronic systems. Every officer present understood they were witnessing a moment that would define the future of their species. The mighty Vorthak Empire, terror of civilized space, had been reduced to choosing between surrender and annihilation. If we agree to your terms, Yithagoth said finally, what assurances do we have that humans won't use this advantage for conquest? If we did too, RC do as say, Reed's expression softened slightly. Supreme Marshal, humanity has no interest in empire building. We simply want to be left alone to develop in peace. Agree to our terms, and your species can continue to exist within your current borders. We're not interested in revenge, only security. Yithagoth looked around the command center at officers who had served the Empire faithfully for decades. Warriors who believed in Vorthak's superiority were now faced with evidence of their complete strategic defeat at the hands of a species they had dismissed as primitive prey. I need to consult with the High Council, he said. You have 57 minutes, Reed replied, checking what appeared to be a chronometer. I should mention that our fleet commanders have been authorized to interpret any delay as a rejection of our terms. The transmission ended, leaving Yithagoth alone with the most important decision in Vorthak history. Around him, status displays showed the true extent of human fleet positions throughout the Empire, each marker representing enough firepower to devastate entire worlds. As he prepared to contact the High Council with news that would shatter everything the Vorthak believed about their place in the galaxy, one thought dominated the Supreme Marshal's mind. They had awakened something that had been pretending to sleep, and now they would have to live with the consequences of their arrogance. The age of Vorthak dominance was ending, and the humans had orchestrated its conclusion with surgical precision. The only question remaining was whether the Empire would choose to end with negotiated surrender or complete annihilation. The countdown had begun. The High Council chamber of the Vorthak Empire had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the planning of galactic conquests, and the subjugation of dozens of species. Never before had it hosted a debate about surrender to an enemy the Empire had considered primitive prey just hours earlier. Supreme Marshal Yithagoth stood before the semicircular arrangement of crystalline thrones, where the 12 members of the High Council deliberated the fate of their species. Each throne held a Vorthok whose exoskeleton bore the ritual modifications of supreme authority. Creatures who had dedicated their lives to expanding the Empire's dominion across the stars. "You expect us to believe." Archon Velthara spoke from the central throne, her voice carrying the authority of 7 centuries of leadership, that mammals who achieved interstellar flight mere decades ago have somehow positioned fleets throughout our core systems without detection? Yithagoth activated the holographic display that dominated the chamber's center, showing tactical readouts from every major Vorthak system. Red markers indicated confirmed human fleet positions, while amber markers showed probable locations based on gravitational anomalies. "The evidence is undeniable, Archon. Our deepest sensor networks confirm massive vessels in orbit around 15 core worlds, including the home system. The humans have achieved total strategic superiority while maintaining the fiction that they were defenseless victims." Counselor Zekmoth, whose scarred carapace told stories of personal combat in the Empire's early expansion wars, leaned forward in his throne. "Marshal, you're asking us to accept that our entire intelligence apparatus was fooled for months by creatures we could crush with minimal effort. That assumption appears to have been the foundation of our error," Yithagoth replied grimly. "Every civilian vessel we destroyed was actually a military reconnaissance platform gathering intelligence on our capabilities. The humans studied us while we believed we were studying them." The chamber fell silent as the council digested the implications. Archon Velthara's compound eyes focused on the tactical display with the intensity of a predator analyzing prey. Except now, they were the ones being hunted. "Show us the engagement records," she commanded. The display shifted to show sensor recordings from the encounters with individual human vessels. The council watched in growing alarm as Vorthak dreadnoughts were systematically dismantled by technology that operated on principles their science couldn't explain. Space-time manipulation, controlled singularity generation, weapons that seemed to edit matter out of existence at a subatomic level. "By the ancient protocols," whispered Counselor Jitar, the Empire's oldest serving member. "They've mastered forces we've only theorized about." "How long do we have?" Archon Velthara asked. Yithagoth checked his chronometer. 37 minutes, until their deadline expires. Admiral Reed was quite specific about the consequences of delay. Counselor Mordak, whose aggressive stance had pushed for accelerated human conquest, stood from his throne. "We are the Vorthok Empire. We have never submitted to any species, never negotiated from a position of weakness. I say we call their bluff." "And if it's not a bluff?" Counselor Retvith asked quietly. "Our analysis indicates the human fleets possess enough firepower to sterilize our core worlds. They could render the Empire uninhabitable within days. Then we die as Vorthak should," Mordak declared. "Better destruction with honor than surrender to prey species." Yithagoth felt compelled to interject. "Counselors?" I spoke with Admiral Reed directly. "This isn't a prey species that accidentally developed advanced technology. These are apex predators who have been pretending to be prey while they prepared for total war. They've been planning our defeat longer than we've been planning their conquest." The debate that followed revealed deep divisions within the council. The younger members, raised during the Empire's most aggressive expansion period, favored resistance regardless of consequences. The elder counselors, who remembered the careful planning required to build the Empire, recognized the strategic reality they faced. "What are their specific terms?" Archon Velthara asked finally. "Complete withdrawal from human space, formal recognition of established borders, and a non-aggression treaty," Yithagoth recited. "They claim no interest in conquest. Only security." "You believe them?" Counselor Zekmoth asked skeptically. "I believe they could have destroyed us already if that was their intention. The fact that they're offering terms suggests they prefer coexistence to annihilation." An urgent chime echoed through the chamber. The communications officer's voice carried barely controlled panic as he reported, "Archon. Incoming transmission from the human admiral. He requests immediate response to their terms." Archon Velthara considered for a moment. Accept the transmission. The chamber's main display activated, showing Admiral Reed in what appeared to be the command center of a human warship. Behind him, Yithagoth could see displays showing real-time tactical information about Vorthok systems. Information that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. Archon Velthara, Reed said, his pronunciation of her name flawless despite its linguistic complexity. I trust the Supreme Marshal has briefed you on our current situation. He has shared your perspective on events, Admiral, the Archon replied carefully. We find some of your claims difficult to accept. Understandable. Perhaps this will help clarify matters. Reed gestured to someone off-screen, and the display split to show tactical feeds from orbit around Vorthak Prime, the Empire's capital world. The Council watched in horror as massive human vessels materialized around their home planet. Ships whose sleek lines and obvious firepower dwarfed even the Empire's most powerful dreadnoughts. The vessels had been there all along. Hidden by technology the Vorthak couldn't detect or understand. 13 battle fleets, Reed announced calmly, positioned around your core worlds. Each fleet carries enough firepower to ensure complete strategic neutralization of all military installations on the planets below. This isn't an invasion, Archon. It's a demonstration of capability. Counselor Mordak rose from his throne, his voice shaking with rage. You dare threaten the homeworld? No species has ever... Counselor. Reed interrupted, his tone remaining perfectly calm. No species has ever been in a position to threaten your homeworld before. We are. What assurance do we have? Archon Velthara asked, her ancient voice betraying none of the fear that filled the chamber. That accepting your terms won't simply delay our destruction until you decide we're inconvenient? Reed's expression became thoughtful. Archon. In the past 6 months, your forces have destroyed 47 human vessels and killed over 8,000 of our people. Each of those deaths was documented, analyzed, and factored into our strategic planning. Yet here I am, offering you a chance to survive this conflict with your empire intact. Your point, Admiral? If we wanted genocide, we could have implemented it months ago. Every raid your forces conducted could have ended with the complete destruction of your fleets. We chose to let you believe you were winning while we gathered the intelligence we needed to achieve strategic dominance. That should tell you something about our intentions. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans could have been slaughtering Vorthak forces from the beginning of the conflict but had chosen restraint even while their own people died. It suggested a level of strategic patience and long-term thinking that the Council found deeply unsettling. Time. Archon, Reed said quietly, checking his chronometer again. You have 18 minutes to make your decision. And if we need more time to consult with other governmental bodies? She asked. Then you've chosen to reject our terms. Archon. We've been monitoring your communications for months. We know exactly how your governmental system functions, who makes the real decisions, and what authority the High Council possesses. You have the power to accept or reject our offer. Use it. Yithagoth watched the play of emotions across the counselors' faces as they processed the full extent of human intelligence penetration. Not only had their enemies achieved military superiority, they had been studying Vorthak government and society with scientific precision. A brief recess, Archon Velthara announced. Admiral, we will contact you within 15 minutes with our decision. The transmission ended, leaving the Council alone with the weight of an impossible choice. The chamber's lighting seemed dimmer somehow, as if the revelation of human capabilities had drained the vitality from the heart of the Empire. Options? The Archon asked simply. Military resistance would be suicide, Yithagoth stated bluntly. Our fleets are outgunned, outmaneuvered, and strategically compromised. The humans know our capabilities better than we know theirs. Diplomatic stalling, suggested Counselor Redivith. They've anticipated that. Admiral Reed made it clear they'll interpret any delay as rejection of their terms. Counselor Mordak slammed his clawed fist against his throne's armrest. So we're expected to simply submit? Abandon centuries of expansion and accept limitations imposed by mammals? The alternative is extinction, Yithagoth replied grimly. Complete and total annihilation of our species within days. Perhaps, Archon Velthara said slowly, it's time to consider the possibility that we have been the prey species all along, and we simply didn't realize it until the predators decided to reveal themselves. The observation hung in the chamber like a death sentence. The mighty Vorthak Empire, terror of 3-star systems, had been reduced to choosing between survival through submission or honorable extinction. Counselor Jitar, whose great age granted him perspective beyond immediate military considerations, spoke into the silence. In the ancient texts, there is a saying, "The wise predator knows when it has become prey." Perhaps wisdom lies in recognizing that evolution has produced something beyond our ability to fight. All in favor of accepting the human terms? Archon Velthara asked. 7 hands rose immediately. 2 more joined them, after a moment's hesitation. Only Councillors Mordak and Yextal refused to vote for surrender. The motion carries, the Archon announced. Supreme Marshal, inform Admiral Reed that the Vorthak Empire accepts their terms unconditionally. As Yithagoth prepared to transmit what amounted to the Empire's surrender to an enemy they had never truly understood, he reflected on the bitter irony of their situation. They had set out to conquer what they believed was a primitive species, only to discover that they themselves were the primitive ones. The age of Vorthak dominance was ending not with the glory of battle, but with the quiet recognition that they had encountered something far beyond their ability to comprehend or defeat. The humans had taught them the hardest lesson any predator could learn. There was always something higher on the food chain. The only question now was whether they would be allowed to survive the encounter. 6 months after the surrender of the Vorthak Empire, former Supreme Marshal Yithagoth stood in the observation deck of the prisoner exchange facility, orbiting the neutral world of Kepler 438b. Through the massive transparisteel viewport, he watched as human and Vorthak vessels conducted the careful choreography of returning captured personnel to their respective species. The irony was not lost on him that he was witnessing this exchange as a free being rather than a prisoner. The humans had kept their word about the treatment of captured Vorthak forces, providing medical care, adequate accommodation, and even educational opportunities for those who wished to learn about human culture and technology. Contemplating the view, Marshal? Yithagoth turned to find Admiral Marcus Reed approaching, the human's expression as calm and analytical as it had been during their first communication. The former Supreme Marshal had learned during his time in human custody that Reed was something of a legend among their military forces, a strategic planning specialist who had helped design the entire deception that led to Vorthak defeat. Admiral, Yithagoth acknowledged with a slight nod that had become his customary greeting. I was observing the efficiency of these operations. Your people have managed the prisoner exchange with remarkable precision. Reed joined him at the viewport, watching as another transport filled with former Vorthak prisoners prepared to depart for Empire space. It helps that both sides want this process to succeed. Your council has been remarkably cooperative in honoring the ceasefire terms. They understand the alternatives, Yithagoth replied grimly. The demonstration your forces provided 6 months ago was quite convincing. During their captivity, selected Vorthak officers had been given carefully controlled tours of human military installations, ostensibly as part of prisoner exchange negotiations. What they had seen there had fundamentally changed their understanding of the balance of power in the galaxy. The humans hadn't simply developed advanced weapons, they had created an entirely new category of warfare that operated on principles the Vorthak were only beginning to comprehend. Marshal, may I ask you something that's been bothering me? Reed's tone carried genuine curiosity rather than interrogation. Of course. Why didn't you see it coming? Your species has conquered dozens of civilizations. You must have encountered deception tactics before. Yithagoth considered the question, one that had haunted him throughout his captivity. We became victims of our own success, Admiral. For generations, the pattern was always the same. We encountered a species, analyzed their capabilities, and planned their conquest accordingly. The variables were military strength, technological level, and strategic thinking. We never encountered a species that deliberately appeared weaker than they actually were. Humans have been using deception as a survival strategy for millennia, Reed observed. Camouflage, misdirection, strategic retreat to prepare stronger defenses. It's fundamental to our nature. Perhaps that's why we missed it. Vorthak culture doesn't include concepts like strategic retreat or deliberate weakness. We see those as evolutionary failures rather than tactical advantages. Through the viewport, they watched as another group of human prisoners was transferred to a waiting vessel. These individuals looked different from the Vorthak prisoners, more alert, more confident, as if their captivity had been an interesting experience rather than a defeat. Those are some of the reconnaissance specialists who maintained their covers until capture, Reed explained, noticing Yithagoth's attention. Captain Chen, Commander Torres, Lieutenant Nakamura, they spent months in Vorthak detention facilities, gathering intelligence on your prison procedures, guard rotations, and administrative protocols. Yithagoth stared at the human officers in shock. They were spying on us, even while captive? Standard procedure for deep cover operations. Their capture was anticipated and planned for. Every aspect of their imprisonment provided valuable intelligence about Vorthak's security procedures and military organization. The former Supreme Marshal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. How long have you been planning this war? Reed was quiet for a long moment, watching the prisoner exchange operations with the same analytical gaze he had shown during their first communication. The planning began the day your species made first contact with human space and opened fire on a civilian transport. We've been preparing for this conflict for 18 years, Marshal. Every raid, every attack, every casual act of violence committed by Vorthak forces was incorporated into our strategic analysis. 18 years, Yithagoth repeated, trying to process the implications. Your entire contact with our species has been preparation for war. Not war, Marshal, defensive planning. There's a significant difference. War implies we intended to invade your territory or destroy your civilization. Our planning focused on neutralizing the threat you posed while minimizing casualties on both sides. Yithagoth looked at the human admiral with new understanding. That's why you offered surrender terms, rather than simply destroying our fleets. Exactly. Genocide solves the immediate problem but creates long-term instability. A negotiated settlement with appropriate safeguards protects human interests while allowing your species to continue existing within acceptable parameters. And if we had refused your terms? Reed's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that reminded Yithagoth why humans had become the apex predators of their region of space. Then we would have implemented the Omega Protocol and removed the Vorthak Empire as a strategic threat. Permanently. Permanently. How many species have you done this to? Yithagoth asked quietly. You're the first, Marshal. Most species we encounter either pose no threat or recognize the futility of aggression once they understand our capabilities. The Vorthak Empire was unique in your persistent belief that you could conquer us despite mounting evidence to the contrary. The observation stung because it was accurate. Even now, Yithagoth could remember the dismissive attitude he and other Vorthak commanders had maintained toward human defensive capabilities, the casual arrogance that had blinded them to the growing sophistication of their opponents' responses. What happens now? He asked. Reed gestured toward the ongoing prisoner exchange. Your people return home with a clear understanding of the new strategic reality. The Empire continues to exist within its current borders, under the terms of the ceasefire. Trade relationships develop. Eventually, perhaps, something approaching normal diplomatic relations. And if young Vorthak commanders decide to test human resolve in a few decades, then they'll discover that our defensive capabilities have continued to evolve. Marshal, the technology we used 6 months ago was already 3 generations old. We revealed only what was necessary to achieve strategic objectives. Yithagoth felt his compound eyes widening in shock. The weapons that destroyed our fleets were obsolete? Not obsolete, but certainly not state-of-the-art. Our current defensive systems operate on principles that would make those demonstrations look primitive by comparison. The former Supreme Marshal walked to another section of the observation deck, trying to process the magnitude of human technological advancement. The species they had dismissed as barely evolved mammals had not only achieved strategic dominance but had been restraining themselves to avoid revealing their true capabilities. Admiral, may I ask about your personal role in this deception? Reed joined him at the new viewing angle. I was part of the strategic planning committee from the beginning. My specialty was psychological warfare and enemy capability assessment. I spent years studying Vorthak military doctrine and cultural biases to develop the deception protocols. And the individual encounters? Captain Reed, Admiral Chen, the others who died maintaining their covers? All volunteers who understood the importance of the mission. Their sacrifice provided the intelligence we needed to achieve bloodless victory. They're honored as heroes of the highest order in human military tradition. Yithagoth was silent for several minutes, watching the final phases of the prisoner exchange. Human and Vorthak vessels were preparing to depart the neutral zone, carrying their respective personnel back to their home territories. The operation had proceeded with clockwork precision, a testament to the careful planning and mutual cooperation that had characterized the post-surrender period. "Admiral," he said finally, "I have one last question. Yes? If circumstances were different, if the Vorthak Empire had approached humanity with peaceful intentions rather than aggressive ones, what would have happened?" Reed considered the question carefully. "Honestly, we probably would have shared our technological advances, established beneficial trade relationships, and worked together on scientific research projects. Humans generally prefer cooperation to conflict when dealing with species that aren't trying to exterminate us." The irony was bitter but complete. The Vorthak Empire had achieved the exact opposite of their intended goals through their aggressive approach to human contact. Instead of conquering a primitive species, they had revealed the existence of an advanced civilization that now held strategic dominance throughout their region of space. "My species has much to learn about interstellar relations," Yithagoth admitted. "Most species do, Marshal. The key is being willing to learn from mistakes, rather than repeating them." Most species, as the last transport vessels departed the exchange facility, Yithagoth realized he was witnessing the end of an era. The age of Vorthak expansion was over. Replaced by a new galactic order in which humans held the position of strength, his people would have to adapt to being a regional power rather than an expanding empire, constrained by the reality of human military superiority. But perhaps, he reflected, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The resources the empire had dedicated to constant warfare could be redirected towards scientific advancement, cultural development, and improving the lives of Vorthak citizens. The defeat that had seemed like the end of everything might actually be the beginning of something better. "Admiral," he said as they prepared to part ways, "I want you to know that your conduct during this conflict has been honorable. You could have destroyed us completely, but you chose a path that allowed both our species to survive and potentially prosper." Reed nodded, his expression serious. "Marshal, honor in warfare isn't about demonstrating superior firepower. It's about achieving strategic objectives while maintaining ethical principles. Both our species have learned something valuable from this encounter." As Yithagoth prepared to board the final Vorthak transport, he took one last look through the observation deck's viewport. Somewhere out there, human fleets maintained their vigilant watch over the border regions, ready to respond to any renewal of hostilities. But they were also ready to engage in peaceful trade, scientific cooperation, and diplomatic relations if the Vorthak chose that path instead. The choice, as Admiral Reed had made clear from the beginning, was entirely up to them. For the first time in his long military career, former Supreme Marshal Yithagoth found himself hoping that his species would choose wisely. They had learned the hard way that the universe contained predators more dangerous than themselves. The question now was whether they were wise enough to evolve beyond their predatory nature before they encountered something even more advanced than the humans. As his transport departed for Vorthak space, carrying the final group of prisoners home, Yithagoth reflected on the most important lesson his species had learned. In a galaxy full of intelligent life, the greatest threat wasn't always the most obvious one. Sometimes the most dangerous predator was the one that looked like prey until it was too late to escape. The humans had taught them that lesson with characteristic thoroughness. Now it was up to the Vorthak to prove they were intelligent enough to benefit from the education.